Welcome to Seattle Voices. I'm Eric Liu. I'm just thrilled to have as my guest today Claudia Kauffman, state senator and a pioneer, the first woman member of the Washington State Senate to be a Native American. Mm-hmm. And Claudia, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
We were just talking before the camera started rolling about life as a state senator. This is your first term. Is life as a member of the state Senate anything at all like what you thought it would be?
You know, I get that question asked a lot, and I have to tell you that it's more. It's much more than I thought it would be. I just love it. I absolutely love it. I loved every part of it, the learning, the highs and the lows. It was all a learning process. So for me, I was so excited, and I wanted to continue to go. Mm-hmm. And at Sine Die, when things were over, I was like, okay,
you didn't want to adjourn.
Yeah, let's do it again. And they're like, go home.
The veterans hate it when people like you come along, right?
Yeah, so I had a blast.
So highs and the lows. What were some of the highs and the lows of this, your first session in the legislature?
Well, you know, going in, you have to hit the ground running. And they're not going to tell you everything what to do. And so my part was learning. The first meeting when we had in caucus was, which committees do you want to be on? And so I wrote transportation education, and I turned it in, and they said, why did you only put 2? I said, okay. Mm-hmm. So they gave me 4 committees. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, you're learning through all of that and what to do. And a lot of time I spent just really visualizing everything, watching everything, and learning as I go. So when it came time for the state budget, they said, Claudia, what are your priorities? And I said, well, I'm going to put down more than 2.
You're a quick study.
So then I learned, of course, that's, you know, when they really only want 2 or 3. But, you know, my list was 15. I had all these things. I was like, okay.
So you get thrown into a situation like this. And you were not a political neophyte by any means. I mean, you have worked in and around politics and civic life, and we'll talk some more about that. But still, it's new. It's a new thing to be an elected member of a legislative body. How much of your learning experience that you were describing was you yourself kind of hunting, gathering, figuring things out on your own, and how much of it was being kind of coached or brought along or mentored in any kind of explicit way by somebody else?
Well, they had a lot of mentors there for the new freshman senators, quite a few of us this year. And so that helped in terms of protocol, you know, things what to expect, you know, when you stand up, sit down, you know, all those things that happen. But when it came time to politics, you know, politics within politics, you really have to dig within yourself to move forward and navigate that system. Mm-hmm. So that part, I drew on my past experiences in learning how to navigate through that kind of system. The other part, I have to tell you, which was great, was because of the experience that I had with previous legislators, that I knew I could go to them and ask them, you know, tell me about this, or how do I work this? And when my bills from the Senate went into the House, I can go to all the House members that I knew and said, these are my bills that are coming over, can you help on that end? So that part really helped out.
And the work that you do that had already brought you into contact with many legislators is you run federal level intergovernmental affairs for the Muckleshoot Indian tribe. And I'm wondering, just in that kind of work, having spent time with elected officials and everything else, did it seem radically different to be on the other side, on the receiving end of folks who were wanting to push a particular thing or lobby for a particular thing? Or did it seem fairly seamless, all part of the same big game to you?
It seemed to really meld together. There was a mixture of both, in that sense that I knew a lot of people, you know, had some sense of a relationship with people. And so I knew that I could go to them, not necessarily knowing that I knew everything about what was happening. And so it was kind of a mixture of the two.
Mm-hmm. I loved the way you put it a moment ago when we were talking about times when you have to, I think you said, you have to dig within yourself to figure your way around. What does that mean, to dig within yourself? And what were some times this session where you felt like you had to do that?
Well, I actually had signed on to a bill. They told you early on, there's going to be a day when you regret signing on to a bill. And mine came so fast. And I felt really bad, not knowing. I didn't read the full text. I trusted the person who said, Claudia, you got to sign in. And I was like, you know, okay. and I signed on. And then and the next morning I was getting phone calls. You know, people were visiting me. What were you thinking?
Mm-hmm.
And so that part, yes, I did have an experience where I said, okay, you know, what do I need to do? I can't focus on, I'm really upset that this happened. I have to focus on what am I going to do now?
Mm-hmm.
How do I move this forward so that I can correct this situation? And so I had to go through and learn all the steps. What do I need to do? You know, take my name off of it.
Mm-hmm.
Do I talk to other people? Which committee is it going to go to? You know, and who do I know on that committee? And the whole thing. So that was something that I really had to, because it is personal when you do that and
Sure.
people say, what were you thinking? And you realize, you know, I wasn't. So you have to move forward.
Now, you were describing the excitement, the exhilaration of being in this realm. Any moments of fear?
No moments of fear. No, I loved it. I want you to know that I really do. I am hooked. I am in. But another part of it was humbling. It was very humbling to be in that position. It's humbling to sit on the floor of the state senate and look up at the ceiling and the gallery and see all these senators and realize that I am here. I'm sitting here making these yays or nays on these votes. And so that's really meaningful.
One of the things that you've talked about in many other settings, and we've had these conversations as well, is you have a very high mindfulness of who came before you, who has shaped you, has made opportunities possible for you. In your early days, I don't know if you can rewind and remember your early days in the Senate this past session, who were the kind of names and voices and people who'd shaped you in the past that were now suddenly like right there in your head and like you were hearing their voices?
Mm-hmm. That's true. It's true. Well, growing up in Seattle, the youngest of 7 children, I had a very strong family, a very mindful family of the politics and what's shaping our community and what we need to do and how we need to react. As a child, I didn't know what the word boycott meant, but I knew we were doing it. We were boycotting this. And doing that and recognizing that public policy affects your life every single day. And you can see it so clearly when you're in the state senate, and you can see all these people doing these things. And Bernie Whitebear, of course, in addition to my family, Bernie Whitebear was one who had always made sure I was up front, and he was the one who was always pushing me, you know, say something, do something, you know. Rather than saying someone should, you know, it's like, what can I do? What can I say to move forward?
How would he push you? He would literally say, this is an opportunity, Claudia, for you to...
He would do that, and he would also say, Claudia Kauffman has something to say. And he would sit down. Because I went with him on so many different places that he would take that opportunity and he would do it. And oftentimes he would be asked to speak at an event or to give a welcome at an event that was happening at Daybreak Star. And he would send Claudia Kauffman down to do it for him. And so...
Say a word for our viewers who don't know who Bernie Whitebear was and what just his impact on community life here. I mean,
he was a wonderful person that started way back in the 50s, and coming out of the military, he came over to worked at Boeing in Seattle. And part of his work, not part of his work, but part of his own personal mission was to organize community. And so he went around and started learning who are these community members, and started visiting them. And he came to our house and he visited our family. And so I remember him like I was, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 years old, coming to our house and visiting all the time. Part of that community organizing led to the takeover of Fort Lawton. And he's organizing and working together with people of color, and not just the Native American community, but people of color. And so he got all these people together and went from the Filipino Community Center on Rainier Avenue and had this caravan out to Fort Lawton to do the takeover. And I was too young to be involved in it, but my family was, my mother and my sisters, you know, they all climbed over the fence and got arrested and all that. So he was the one who led that charge and was successful in securing 20 acres for United Indians of All Tribes Foundation.
And you talk about this, not that particular experience, but I think in general, the kind of activism that you were steeped in growing up wasn't only about the Native American community, but there was this very unique cross-racial, cross-cultural coalition building that today gets instantiated in MEDC, the Minority Executive Directors Coalition. Bernie Whitebear, your mentor, was one of the amigos, right?
Right.
Bob Santos and Larry Gossett and Roberto Maestas. And I'm wondering for you now, as you have been moving forward here, how much of this was just so internalized in just the way you grew up, the way, like you said, you were boycotting before you knew what the word meant, right? And it was just in the air. And how much do you remember specific, explicit lessons that either Bernie, White Bear, or anybody else taught you? I mean, was there a specific, like, Claudia, when you do something in public life, you got to do X, Y, or Z? Or is it more just you absorbed it all by osmosis?
It was a combination of things. It was a combination of my father having patience. He always practiced patience. My mother was always go, charge, charge, charge. I'm small, but I'm mighty, was one of her words that she always, phrase that she always said, because she was only like 4'10". And she goes, I'm small, but I'm mighty. And she was a very powerful person. And Bernie White Bear kind of really organized those thoughts and said, yes, it's true, something needs to happen. But before you say what needs to happen, how is it going to happen? So organize it. So not just say, this would be a great idea or that would be a great idea, but get everything behind it and present it that way. The other thing that he taught me was when you see, he said, read the paper every day. And he would say, I will pay you every morning to sit here and read the papers. So I used to sit and read the papers, and he would pull out articles and say, this is what happened with this children's fund down in Olympia. And this is what the legislators are saying. They were not successful, and here's all the reasons why. And I was like, okay. And he said, you learn from that, because we have a proposal, and this is, we're not going to do this. We learn from this. And so he went down, and that's when he brought me down to Olympia and put me in that position to say, Claudia's got something to tell you.
It's an amazing apprenticeship in public policy, right? I mean, it's,
yeah, but all those lessons, they all come back. They all come back, and they teach you well.
You grew up on Beacon Hill, is that right?
Yes,
in Seattle?
Beacon Hill.
And was the community that you grew up in itself also multi-ethnic? And I mean, did you from an early age start just experiencing life as, you build coalitions?
Most definitely. It's so diverse. Beacon Hill is very, very diverse, and I can't even count, the diversity of all these races that were my neighbors. And knowing that I could run over here, run over there, and go play with these friends and those friends, we all played together. I didn't know growing up that not everyone grew up like that. It wasn't until much later when someone said something to me, it's like, well, don't, and I'm like, no. I realized that not everyone has that opportunity, and I think it was a wonderful thing to have in my life, to have that diversity, to know that people can get along in all different races, and it completely reinforces what Minority Executive Directors Coalition has done throughout the years.
Would you say, if you look at the path that you've taken from the work you've been doing and now to the state senate, that there was for you a vision and a path going forward, or that you've more just kind of, as things have unfolded by accident, by chance, have opened up into different opportunities? How mindful were you or conscious, as a teenager or as a young adult, that you might want to get involved in public life, public policy, politics, things like that?
No.
Not at
I
all.
didn't think that.
What did you think you were going to be doing? What was your passion and path at the time?
My passion and path were always around the values that I was raised with, which is, you take care of your children, you have respect and dignity for your elders, and honor the sacrifice of your veterans, remember your veterans. And everything that I did in my life were around those values. And you serve your community is another one. And for me, growing up, serving your community was a way of life. It wasn't something that you did for a couple hours on a Saturday. This was something you did every day, that you incorporated in your life. And growing up, we always had room in our house. Even though we had 7 children in a 3-bedroom house, we always had room for another child to come in. If there was a cousin or an aunt or a friend of a friend who needed a place to stay, they always had room in our house. And so growing up, even before I had my son, it seemed right to me to take in foster children. And so I took in foster children for about 7 years. And then I had my own son, and that was real exciting.
And that's, I think, 10 foster children, right?
10 foster children. In fact, when I went into labor, my husband drove me down to the hospital, and I was there for several days, and I learned when it was time to go home that actually one of the foster children had stolen my car from home. So my car was, the police had called and said, it's in the shop because it can't run anymore.
Wow.
I said, okay, so I learned don't leave your keys in her.
Not your usual labor and delivery, huh?
Yeah, but that's okay. I mean, that's all part of, being a foster parent. You take the good, the bad. You do everything that you can to provide a loving home for children.
Mm-hmm. And as you were growing up in this way, again, steeped in the idea that you serve, this is what you do, at what point did you begin to have clearer sense of what you might actually do for a living, and what were the ideas that began crystallizing for you? It sounds like politics wasn't the obvious thing that was coming to mind then.
Politics wasn't the obvious thing, but being politically aware was.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things that I worked on as an adult was, what I used to do was, on Veterans Day or Memorial Day, I would take my family and drag them all over town, Seattle or Tahoma National Cemetery in Kent, and say, we have to honor our veterans. It's very important. It'd be pouring down rain. The kids were like, Mom. And doing that, and I would say, why don't we have something locally? Why don't we have something in our own community? And then, I'll go bonk, I can do one. So doing that, the first year my husband and I did it, we had all this food and all these things, and we had 3 veterans show. But after that, it grew, and more people came in, and now it's so large that I don't do anything anymore. I get invited to it now, and people took it over, and they
Where
have
did this come from? Your focus and interest in honoring the service and the sacrifice of veterans. I mean, when did that emerge, and how did that emerge?
That's one of the values that many American Indians have, is that you value your warriors and you honor your veterans and the sacrifices that they've made, not only during their service, but after service. They come home and they're still veterans, and they continue to serve. They continue to serve in the military funerals. They continue to serve to watch over during a funeral. They continue to serve in powwows, in the color guard. They continue to serve in a Native American traditional ceremony. When an eagle feather falls to the ground, it is the veteran who picks it up. No one else can pick that up, and a ceremony is done. So the veterans continue to serve our community, and it's upon us to continue to honor them.
Did you were a member of the Nez Perce tribe. Did you grow up with a lot of tribal cultural ritual and experience, or is it something that more later in life you got reconnected or re-engrossed in?
No, we grew up that way. I grew up constantly involved in my culture. Mm-hmm. And so that was, it's amazing, because the same thing, growing up in a diverse community, I thought everyone did. Growing up with my culture, I thought everybody did, It wasn't until later that I learned that not everybody has that opportunity, and not everybody grew up like I did. And having, even though we were a large family, a small house, and extremely low income, we always did these things as a family. We always talked about politics. We always talked about serving our community, and we always made sure that we had our culture involved.
What did your parents do? How is it that they were themselves so steeped in this ethic of service?
I'm not sure. My father was a World War II veteran, and met my mother not too long after he had been injured. And anyways, they met, and they moved to Seattle area. And he went to school, and then he went to work as an architect for the city of Seattle, and he worked there until he retired. My mother was a stay-at-home mom for the most part. She was sick a lot. I remember she was sick a lot when I was young. But all of that just continued. It was something we always did. And
so I'm just thinking now, you talked about your own children, your foster children, and passing on what you know. Now in the role that you're in, this very public role, as a member of the state senate, as a pioneer in the state senate, how often are you asked to be sort of the role model, the figure who gives lessons and counsel and advice to young people, particularly young people of color who might be interested in politics? And what do you say to particularly young women who may or may not have ever thought about getting involved in politics? How do you even open up a conversation and pass on that ethic to them?
Well, I think determination is one thing that I grew up with. It was instilled within me growing up in my life. determination, having determination to know that you can move forward, that you need to move forward. And when I do have these requests, I speak of going back to history and talk about who are these people, the American Indian Women's Service League back in the 50s, what they did to organize community, and how they went down during the Federal Indian Relocation Act. American Indians were going to major metropolitan cities, and so these Indian women would go and sit by the bus station and the train station and wait for a family to come off, and they would say, "Hello, my name is so-and-so, and welcome to Seattle. Here are the things that I know about. Here's some housing information. Here's some rental information. Here's jobs. Here's the number to Boeing." All these things that they did, and maintain that contact. And knowing that these are simple steps. You can think of them as just simple steps, but they're meaningful. The steps that you take when you see there's any veterans dinners locally, it's a simple step. You put one on. The same thing for the elders, the same thing for the leadership, and recognizing what they have accomplished and say, let's recognize that. And knowing that if you do one thing, people will follow you. Being a good leader also means being a good follower, because you can accomplish so much more together than you can on your own. Mm-hmm. And so I recognize that if you just step forward and do something, people will follow and people will be there, and know that you have the strength within you to do that.
Do you find that it's hard to either recruit, not even necessarily literally recruit, but to spark an interest in politics and civic life among the younger generation today, again, particularly among younger people of color?
No, I actually find it very exciting, and there's a lot of thought around that, and what does it mean? What does voter registration mean, and voter education mean, and what does GOTV? And so explaining all of that to them and the importance of that, even more so now that I know how much public policy really does affect their lives, and that it's not just saying I want to be in the conversation. You're actually there making the decision, and knowing that you can do that, and that it's important to have that knowledge and understanding that this is so important, not only for themselves, but for their children, their children's children. It goes on and on.
What have you learned about yourself this first session in the legislature about areas where you feel like you want to grow or change or learn more? I mean, what are some of the things where you feel like, okay, I want to be better at this, or I want to become more like that? I mean, what's crossed your mind that way?
Well, going into the legislative session, there's so much information coming at you, and especially being, my first session, everyone wanted to come in and say and tell me what their priorities are, because I hadn't heard them all before, and so every 15 minutes, there's someone new. And in 15 minutes, another person, 15 minutes, another person. You have to go to a committee. So they have another person walking with you, committee, talking to you while you're walking. It's called a walking meeting. And so, getting all this information and trying to digest it, that is a real challenge, to be able to digest these things and to be able to take them and incorporate them into the work you do as a senator. And so that's one thing I really want to do, is how do I really organize this information in a real meaningful way so that I can move forward. Because it was really like what they say, drinking out of a fire hydrant. It's like, all this information. But also learning more about the process. One of the questions I asked a senator once when there was an amendment to a bill, and so I asked the senator, I said, now, how did this happen? How did this come about that there was this amendment? And there was, there's lobbyists and they wanted this and that. I said, yeah, but that's not the lobbyist name on there. That's your name. How did this happen? Who got invited to this party? And how does that work? And I didn't mean in a threatening manner. I just really want to know how do you do those things, those processes? And so that's more of the process that I want to learn. And setting priorities and all these things. I mean, some people really love to have their fingerprints on just about everything. And I don't want to have my fingerprints on everything. I really want to be meaningful in what I do and everything that I do, so that I'm not all over the place, that what I do really does count and meaningful to me.
Well, last minute or two here, I just want this phrase you said, that let your colleague, who got invited to this party? How do you get invited to this party? In a way, is kind of a great question overall for the way that you've worked in public life over a career, to bring more people into the process and have more voices folded in. Do you think now that you're at this particular party, the one of legislative action, that this is the arena that if there's a young person watching this show right now, in their 20s, and they've got this idealism, a lot of the message they might hear is, the most change you can make today isn't in politics, because politics is all kind of gummed up and stuck and everything. Go and work at a nonprofit or go do something in the community.
Oh, right.
What would you say about, to that person now, knowing what you know about, which party is better,
Well, I actually had a conversation with a few people about running for office. People who are doing great work in the community, and their response is, "I'm better as a voice on the outside, pushing everyone." And I try to explain that you can make so much change on the inside, more than you realize. Just being in the room, and just knowing when people, before they start to talk, they look at you and, okay. And just being in the room and knowing and bringing that perspective forward is very, very powerful. And you can really achieve a lot for the community, for the citizens, on these things that are important. And so having that conversation is really important. There are those who really do want to stay on the outside, who really do want to be the pusher. And then there's people who, on this side, people don't think it's possible. They don't think it's possible for me to be there. I didn't think growing up on Beacon Hill that I would become a state senator. I hadn't even run for anything in my life before. I just knew this was a next natural step for me. I've done these things professionally. I've done these things personally. I have this determination within me. I see this as a next natural step, and that's what I wanted to get towards. And so my husband says, "You swing for the fence." I said, "Yeah." I didn't go to school board or city council or anything. I said, this is it, and here's the steps. And I surrounded myself with people who knew that knew the process.
We're looking forward to seeing what other balls fly out of the park as you keep on swinging.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being with us, Senator.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
My guest today has been Senator Claudia Kauffman, representing the 47th District, and you've been watching Seattle Voices. I'm Eric Liu. Thanks for watching, and tune in again.